My name is Joel, and I am 62 years old. I am standing in front of a house that I built with my own two hands over 30 years. This house watched my son grow up after his mother passed away. I always believed this home would be his inheritance someday. But there are things about your own children that you never expect to discover. Last week I found something in my mailbox that changed everything I thought I knew about my boy. Before we begin this story, let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have not already. Stay with me through this one because sometimes the person who hurts you the most is the one you loved the hardest. I need to take you back to the beginning so you can understand what this house means to me and why what happened cuts so deep. My wife Linda and I bought this place when our son Derek was just 2 years old. It was a fixer-upper in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado. The previous owners had let it fall into disrepair. The roof leaked in 3 places. The kitchen cabinets were falling off their hinges. The backyard was nothing but weeds and broken concrete. But Linda saw potential in it. She said the bones were good and the neighborhood was perfect for raising a family. I was working as an electrician for a large construction company back then. The pay was steady but not spectacular. Linda worked as a nurse at the local hospital, pulling double shifts whenever she could. Between the two of us, we scraped together enough for the down payment. I remember signing those mortgage papers with sweaty palms, wondering if we were making a mistake. But we were not making a mistake. We were building a life. Every weekend for years, I worked on that house. I replaced the roof myself, spending countless Saturdays up on a ladder while Derek played in the yard below. I tore out the old kitchen and installed new cabinets, new countertops, new flooring. I refinished the hardwood floors throughout the house, sanding them down on my hands and knees until they gleamed. I built a fence around the backyard so Derek would have a safe place to play. I planted an apple tree when he turned 5, telling him we would watch it grow together. That house became everything to us. It was a colonial-style home, 2 stories, 4 bedrooms with a big front porch, where Linda and I would sit in the evenings after Derek went to bed. The lot was half an acre with plenty of room for a vegetable garden that Linda loved to tend. We added a 2-car garage when Derek was in middle school. Every improvement I made with my own hands. Every nail I hammered, every wire I ran, every pipe I fitted was a piece of my heart going into those walls. Then everything changed when Derek was 12 years old. Linda started feeling tired all the time. She blamed it on working too many shifts, on not getting enough sleep. But I knew my wife. Something was wrong. I finally convinced her to see a doctor, and that was when we got the news that would shatter our world. Breast cancer. Stage 3. The next 3 years were the hardest of my life. Linda went through surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. I watched my beautiful wife waste away her hair, falling out, her strength fading day by day. I would come home from work and take over her care so she could rest. I learned to cook because she was too weak to stand at the stove. I learned to braid Derek hair for school pictures because Linda's hands shook too much. Derek was struggling too. He was a teenager dealing with his mother's illness. He acted out at school, got into fights, let his grades slip. I tried to be there for him as much as I could, but I was stretched so thin between work and caring for Linda that sometimes I felt like I was failing everyone. Linda passed away on a Tuesday morning in April. Derek was 15 years old. I held her hand as she took her last breath, and I promised her I would take care of our son. I would make sure he grew up to be a good man. After the funeral, I threw myself into being the best father I could be. I turned down promotions that would have required travel because I needed to be home for Derek. I learned to help him with his homework, even though I had never been much of a student myself. I drove him to basketball practice 3 times a week and sat in the bleachers cheering at every game. I made dinner every night even when I was exhausted, because I wanted him to have some normalcy. There were nights when I would sit alone in the living room after Derek had gone to bed, looking at Linda's photograph on the mantel, wondering if I was doing enough. The silence in that house was deafening sometimes, but I kept going because that is what you do for your children. You keep going. Derek graduated from high school and got accepted to Colorado State University. He wanted to study business, and I was so proud of him. I paid his tuition out of my savings and by working overtime whenever I could. I wanted him to have opportunities I never had. I never went to college myself, and I wanted better for my son. He graduated with a degree in business administration. At his graduation ceremony, he hugged me and said, "Thank you, Dad, for everything." I cried right there in front of everyone. I did not care who saw. Then Derek met Heather. She came from a wealthy family somewhere out east. Her father was some kind of investment banker, and she had grown up with money in a way that Derek and I never had. The first time I met her, she looked around my house with an expression I could not quite read. Later, she made a comment about how quaint the neighborhood was, how it must have been nice in its day. I told myself she did not mean anything by it. But the truth is, I never felt comfortable around Heather. She had a way of making me feel small, like I was not good enough for her world. When they got engaged, I hoped things would get better. I hoped that once she became part of the family, she would warm up to me. That did not happen. After the wedding, Derek started changing. He called less often. When he did visit, Heather always seemed impatient to leave. She would check her phone constantly, sighing loudly, making comments about traffic or appointments they needed to get to. Derek would cut our visits short, apologizing with his eyes, but never with his words. I told myself this was normal. Young couples are busy. They have their own lives. I should not take it personally. I retired when I turned 60. After 40 years of working with my hands, my body was telling me it was time to stop. My knees ached. My shoulders were stiff every morning. But retirement was strange. The house felt emptier than ever. I kept Derek's room exactly the way he had left it, hoping he might come to visit more often, now that I had free time. He did not. Some evenings I would sit on the front porch, watching the sun go down, looking at that apple tree I planted when Derek was 5. It had grown tall and strong, producing bushels of apples every fall. I would think about how fast time had gone by, how quickly that little boy had become a man I hardly recognized anymore. But I never stopped loving him, not for a single moment. And I never imagined he would do what he did. The day everything changed started like any other day. It was a Tuesday morning in March. I had just come back from my walk around the neighborhood, something I did every morning to keep my joints from getting too stiff. The air was still cold, and there was frost on the grass. I remember thinking spring would be coming soon, and I should start planning what to plant in the garden this year. I stopped at the mailbox at the end of the driveway and pulled out the usual stack of envelopes. Bills, advertisements, a catalog from some home improvement store. But there was one letter that caught my attention. It was from a law firm I had never heard of before. The return address was somewhere in Denver, but the name meant nothing to me. I figured it was junk mail, maybe one of those class action lawsuit notices that come around every few months. But something made me open it anyway. The letter inside made my heart stop. It was a notification regarding a real estate transaction at my address. The letter referenced a sale agreement that was pending completion, and it mentioned something about verifying property ownership before finalizing the transfer. I read the letter 3 times, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A sale agreement. For my house. The house I was standing in front of at that very moment. I went inside and sat down at the kitchen table, my hands trembling. This had to be some kind of mistake. Or maybe it was a scam, one of those phishing attempts you hear about on the news. I decided to call the phone number on the letterhead to straighten things out. A receptionist answered and transferred me to an attorney named Richard Donovan. I explained that I had received a letter about a property sale, but there must be some mistake because I had not put my house on the market. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Mr. Donovan said something that made my blood run cold. He said the sale was being handled through a power of attorney document that had been filed with the county 2 months prior. According to his records, I had authorized someone to sell the property on my behalf. I told him that was impossible. I had not signed any power of attorney. I had not authorized anyone to do anything with my house. He said he would look into it and get back to me. I hung up the phone and sat there in the silence of my kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall ticked. And my mind raced through possibilities, none of them making sense. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder office downtown. I had not slept at all the night before. I needed to see these documents for myself. The clerk at the front desk was a young woman with kind eyes. I explained my situation, and she typed my address into her computer. After a few minutes, she printed out some papers and handed them across the counter. I looked at the power of attorney document. It bore my name. It bore what appeared to be my signature. And it authorized my son Derek to sell my property on my behalf. I stared at that signature. It looked like my handwriting. It was close enough that anyone who did not know better would think I had signed it myself. But I knew I had not signed that document. I had never seen it before in my life. My own son had forged my signature. I asked the clerk what stage the sale was at. She said it was pending final approval with an expected closing date in 2 weeks. The buyer was a real estate investment company. The sale price was $780,000. $780,000. The value of my entire life work. The house where I had raised my son, buried my wife, memories spent 30 years building something meaningful. Derek was trying to sell it out from under me without my knowledge. I thanked the clerk and walked out of that office in a daze. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 15 minutes, unable to start the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I did not trust myself to drive. I kept thinking there had to be an explanation. Maybe Derek had done this as some kind of misguided attempt to help me. Maybe someone had pressured him into it. Maybe if I just called him and talked to him, we could work it out. But another part of me, a part I did not want to listen to, knew the truth. The signs had been there all along. I had just refused to see them. Derek asking about my health more frequently in recent months. Heather comments about how unsafe it was for me to live alone in such a big house. The way they always changed the subject whenever I mentioned my plans for the future. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through neighborhoods I had known for decades. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had made a decision. I was not going to confront Derek. Not yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what was happening, and then I needed to protect myself. The following week, I met with a lawyer named Marcus Webb. He came recommended through an old colleague from my electrician days, a man I trusted with my life. Marcus specialized in real estate law and fraud cases. His office was in a modest building downtown, nothing fancy, which I took as a good sign. I did not want some slick attorney who would charge me a fortune and tell me what I wanted to hear. Marcus listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. He said what my son had done was a serious crime. Forging a signature on a legal document, especially a power of attorney, was fraud. Using that forged document to sell property was theft. If I wanted to pursue this, Derek could face criminal charges and prison time. I sat with that for a moment. Prison. For my own son. Marcus said he understood this was difficult. He had seen cases like this before more often than people would like to think. Adult children taking advantage of elderly parents. It happened every day. But he needed to know what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to stop the sale. I wanted my house back. And I wanted to understand why this was happening. Marcus recommended that before we took any legal action, we should gather as much evidence as possible. He suggested hiring a private investigator to look into Derek's financial situation and to document everything that was going on. That way, if this went to court, we would have an airtight case. I agreed. Marcus gave me the name of an investigator he had worked with before, a former police detective named Samuel Patterson. Samuel was in his late 50s, retired from the force after 25 years. He had a weathered face and steady eyes that had seen too much of the world ugly side. I met with Samuel at a coffee shop the next day. I told him everything. He nodded slowly, taking notes in a small spiral notebook. When I finished, he said he would start digging immediately. Over the next 2 weeks, Samuel uncovered things I never would have found on my own. Derek had lost his job at a marketing firm 8 months ago. He had been let go during a round of layoffs, but he never told me. Every time I asked about work, he said everything was going great. He even mentioned getting a promotion a few months back. It was all lies. Meanwhile, Heather was still living like they had money to burn. Samuel showed me credit card statements he had obtained. Designer handbags, expensive restaurants, a vacation to the Caribbean. Their spending had not slowed down at all after Derek lost his income. But the bills were piling up. Samuel found records showing they owed over $150,000 in credit card debt and personal loans. Their condo had a second mortgage on it, and they were 3 months behind on payments. The bank had already started foreclosure proceedings. Derek was drowning. And instead of coming to me for help, instead of being honest about what was happening, he decided to steal my house. Samuel also discovered how Derek had pulled off the forgery. He had found the notary public, who had certified the power of attorney document. Her name was Susan Feldman, and she worked at a small notary office in a strip mall across town. Samuel paid her a visit, pretending to be looking for notary services. Susan mentioned that a young man had come in a few months back with a power of attorney document. He said his father was elderly and ill, unable to travel. He had a doctor note explaining why the principal could not be present for the signing. Susan had notarized the document based on that note. The doctor note was fake, too. Samuel traced it back to a clinic that had never heard of me. Derek had fabricated everything. Marcus said we had more than enough evidence to proceed. But he wanted one more piece of the puzzle. He hired a handwriting expert to analyze the signature on the power of attorney. The expert compared it to samples of my actual signature from bank documents and other legal papers. The conclusion was definitive. The signature was a forgery. It was close, but there were telltale differences in the letter formation and pen pressure that proved it was not written by my hand. I looked at the folder of evidence that Marcus had assembled. Bank records, credit card statements, photographs, expert analysis, witness statements. My son's entire scheme laid out in black and white. And I felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart. My heart had broken when I first saw that power of attorney document. This was something else. This was the death of hope. The final extinguishing of any belief that there might be an innocent explanation for what Derek had done. Despite everything I had learned, some part of me still wanted to give Derek a chance to explain himself. Maybe I was a fool. Maybe I was just a father who loved his son too much to let go without trying one last time. I called Derek and invited him to come to the house for dinner. I said I wanted to talk about family matters, nothing specific. He hesitated, said he was busy with work. I reminded him that it had been months since he visited. Finally, he agreed. Then Heather called me back a few hours later. Her voice was unusually sweet, almost syrupy. She said they would love to come, and she apologized for not visiting more often. Something about her tone put me on edge, but I thanked her and said I would see them Saturday evening. I spent that Saturday preparing Derek's favorite meal from when he was a kid. Roasted chicken with rosemary and garlic mashed potatoes, green beans from a can, because that was the only way he would eat them as a child. I set the table with the good dishes, the ones Linda used to save for special occasions. When they arrived, Heather walked in first, looking around the living room like she was appraising it. She commented on how charming the crown molding was, how you just did not see craftsmanship like this anymore. It was the most complimentary thing she had ever said about my home, and it made my skin crawl. Derek followed behind her, giving me a quick hug that felt stiff and practiced. He said the house smelled great, just like old times. We sat down to dinner. I asked Derek about his work, watching his face carefully, as he told me about a big project he was leading, a promotion that was coming up, how well everything was going. Lie after lie after lie delivered with a smile. I asked about their finances just in casual conversation. Derek said they were doing fine, putting money away for the future, thinking about buying a bigger place soon. Heather nodded along, adding that they were looking at houses in a nicer neighborhood. I let the lies pile up between us like a wall. Then Heather steered the conversation toward me. She asked about my health, whether I was keeping up with doctor appointments. She mentioned that she had read an article about elderly people living alone, how dangerous it could be. Falls, medical emergencies, no one around to help. Derek picked up the thread. He said he worried about me rattling around in this big house by myself. Maybe it was time to think about other options. A retirement community, perhaps. Somewhere with staff who could keep an eye on me. I asked what would happen to the house if I moved. Derek said they could help me sell it. Take care of all the paperwork, make sure I got a fair price. He said it like he was doing me a favor. Heather added that the real estate market was hot right now. I could probably get close to $800,000 for a place like this. She emphasized the number, watching my face for a reaction. I let the silence stretch out. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I placed it on the table between us. Derek looked at it, and I watched the color drain from his face. It was a copy of the forged power of attorney. I asked him if he recognized it. Derek's mouth opened and closed. Heather froze with her fork halfway to her lips. I asked again. I said I had been to the county recorder office. I had seen the document with my signature on it, a signature I never made. Derek started stammering. He said there must be some mistake. Maybe someone else filed it. Maybe it was identity theft. I told him the notary remembered him. I told him about the fake doctor note. I told him I had hired an investigator who had documented everything. The room went silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Then Heather started talking fast and high-pitched. She said this was all a misunderstanding. Derek had mentioned something about helping with estate planning, but she did not know the details. She had nothing to do with any of this. Derek turned to her with a look of disbelief. He asked if she was seriously throwing him under the bus right now. They started arguing with each other, accusations flying back and forth across my dinner table. Whose idea it was, who knew what, who was really to blame. I let them go on for a minute. Then I stood up. I said enough. They both went quiet. I looked at my son, this man I had sacrificed everything for. I asked him directly, "Why?" Derek's eyes filled with tears. He said he was desperate. The bills were crushing them. The bank was going to take their condo. He did not know what else to do. He said I had almost $800,000 just sitting in this house, money I was not even using. He thought if he could just get access to it, he could fix everything, and then he would pay me back. Somehow take care of me, make it right. I asked him where I was supposed to live while he fixed everything. He did not have an answer. I asked him if he ever planned to tell me, or if I was just going to come home one day to find my house sold to strangers. He looked down at the table. I told them both to leave my house. Derek tried to say something else, tried to apologize, tried to explain. Heather grabbed her purse and headed for the door, muttering about how she knew this was a bad idea. I walked them to the door. Before they stepped outside, I said one last thing. I told Derek I had spent 30 years building this home. I had raised him here after his mother died. I had given him everything I had. And this was how he chose to repay me. The door closed behind them, and I stood there in the silence of my living room, surrounded by all the memories they had tried to steal from me. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my recliner in the living room, staring at the walls I had painted, the floors I had refinished, the mantel where Linda photograph smiled at me from across the room. By morning, my grief had hardened into something else. Not hatred. I could never hate Derek, not completely. But determination. I was not going to let him get away with this. Not because I wanted revenge, but because allowing him to succeed would mean surrendering everything I had worked for. It would mean teaching him that he could betray the people who loved him without consequences. I called Marcus first thing Monday morning. I told him to proceed with the legal action. We filed a civil lawsuit to void the property sale. Since the power of attorney was forged, any transaction based on it was invalid. Marcus assured me we had an airtight case, but these things take time. We needed to be patient and thorough. At the same time, Marcus reported the forgery to the police. A detective from the Economic Crimes Unit came to interview me. His name was Thompson, a stocky man with a buzz cut and a no-nonsense manner. He took my statement, reviewed the evidence, and said he would be in touch. I also reached out to someone I had not spoken to in years. Barbara Kendall was a journalist who worked for the Denver Post. I had met her 20 years earlier when she was writing an article about skilled trades workers. We had stayed in loose contact over the years, exchanging Christmas cards and occasional emails. I told Barbara my story. She was horrified. She said elder fraud was becoming an epidemic, and stories like mine needed to be told. She asked if I would be willing to go on record if the case went public. I said I would think about it. But having Barbara in my corner gave me a sense of security. If Derek or Heather tried to spin the narrative, I would have my own way to tell the truth. Over the following weeks, the evidence continued to mount. Samuel kept digging, uncovering more details about Derek and Heather financial troubles. They had maxed out 5 credit cards. They owed money to Heather parents, who had cut them off after one too many loans that were never repaid. Derek had been interviewing for jobs, but getting nowhere. His references were weak, and his 8-month gap in employment raised red flags with hiring managers. Meanwhile, Marcus obtained additional documentation from the title company handling the sale. The real estate investment firm that was buying my house had no idea the transaction was fraudulent. They had negotiated in good faith, believing they were purchasing a property from a willing seller. When Marcus informed them of the situation, they immediately withdrew from the deal. The sale was dead. My house was safe. But Derek did not go quietly. He started calling me multiple times a day. I did not answer. He left voicemails that swung wildly between apologetic and angry. One message he would be sobbing, begging me to forgive him, saying he never meant to hurt me. The next message he would be shouting, accusing me of destroying his life, saying I was a selfish old man who cared more about a building than his own son. Then Heather tried a different approach. She called with a calm, reasonable voice saying we needed to sit down and talk like adults. She said pursuing legal action would only hurt everyone. She said I could still get the money from selling the house, and they would make sure I was taken care of. She painted a picture of family reconciliation, everyone moving forward together. I recorded every call, every voicemail, every message. I forwarded them all to Marcus for the case file. Then Derek made a mistake that sealed his fate. He texted me saying that if I did not drop the lawsuit, he would go to court and have me declared mentally incompetent. He said he would tell the judge I was senile, that I had agreed to the sale but forgotten about it. He said he had Heather as a witness, and it would be his word against mine. I showed that text to Detective Thompson. He said Derek had just threatened to commit perjury in writing. It would not help his case. Through all of this, I found unexpected sources of strength. My neighbor Walter became a daily presence in my life. He was 80 years old, a widower like me with his own story of family betrayal. His daughter had emptied his savings account years earlier, taking nearly $40,000 before he caught on. He had pressed charges, and she had served 18 months in prison. They had not spoken since. Walter and I would sit on my porch in the afternoons watching the sun go down, sharing stories about our lives. He told me something I have never forgotten. He said, when your own child betrays you, the hardest part is not the betrayal itself. It is realizing that the child you thought you knew never really existed. That person was just a story you told yourself. The real person was there all along, hiding behind the mask, and letting go of that story is like grieving a death. He was right. In a way, I was mourning Derek. Not the man who had forged my signature and tried to steal my house, but the boy I thought he was, the boy I thought I had raised. The civil trial took place on a gray November morning. The courtroom was small and functional, with fluorescent lights that hummed overhead and wooden benches worn smooth by decades of anxious families. I sat at the plaintiff table with Marcus wearing my best suit, the one I had worn to Linda funeral and Derek wedding. I had not touched it in years, but it still fit. I had lost weight over the past few months. Derek and Heather sat at the defendant table with their lawyer, a young man who looked barely out of law school. Derek would not meet my eyes. Heather kept glancing at her phone under the table like she had somewhere better to be. Marcus presented our case methodically. He walked the judge through the timeline of events, from the forged power of attorney to the attempted sale to Derek threatening texts. He called the handwriting expert, who testified that the signature was definitively not mine. He called Samuel, who laid out the evidence of Derek's financial desperation. He played recordings of the threatening phone calls. Derek's lawyer tried to argue that there had been a verbal agreement between Derek and me, that I had authorized the sale but later changed my mind. He suggested I might be confused due to my age, that my memory was unreliable. Marcus objected, pointing out that there was no evidence whatsoever of any verbal agreement, and that suggesting I was mentally impaired without any medical basis was inappropriate. The judge sustained the objection and gave Derek's lawyer a sharp look. When it was Derek's turn to testify, he tried to portray himself as a devoted son who had only been trying to help his aging father. He said I had mentioned selling the house several times over the years. He said he thought he was carrying out my wishes. Marcus Cross examined him ruthlessly. He asked Derek to explain the forged signature. Derek said he thought I would not mind, that he was going to tell me afterward. Marcus asked about the fake doctor note. Derek said that was a misunderstanding, that he thought the notary just needed some kind of documentation. Marcus asked about the threatening texts. Derek said he was upset and did not mean what he wrote. It was painful to watch. Every answer made things worse. Every excuse rang hollow. The judge delivered her ruling from the bench. She said the evidence clearly established that the power of attorney was fraudulent, that I had never authorized the sale of my property, and that Derek had knowingly and deliberately attempted to defraud his own father. She declared the attempted sale null and void, and ordered Derek to pay my legal fees in full. She also said she was referring the matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Derek's face went white. Heather started crying, though whether from genuine distress or performance I could not tell. I sat quietly through the verdict. I did not feel triumphant. I just felt tired. Outside the courthouse, Marcus shook my hand and said we had won. I thanked him for everything he had done. Derek and Heather hurried past without looking at me. Their lawyer was already on his phone, probably trying to figure out how to handle the criminal case. The criminal proceedings moved quickly after that. The district attorney charged Derek with forgery fraud and attempted theft. Given the amount of money involved and the documentary evidence, there was no real question about the outcome. Derek's lawyer negotiated a plea deal. Derek pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a sentence of 2 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. At the sentencing hearing, the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. I had thought about this moment for weeks. Part of me wanted to stand up and tell Derek exactly how much he had hurt me, to make him understand the depth of his betrayal. But when the moment came, I kept it simple. I said I had loved my son and given him everything I could. I said what he did broke something between us that could not be fixed. I said I hoped he would use his time in prison to think about the choices he had made and the person he wanted to become. Derek sat at the defense table with his head bowed. He did not look up. The gavel came down, and it was over. In the months that followed, the story spread beyond what I had expected. Barbara wrote an article about my case for the Denver Post, part of a larger series about elder fraud. The article was picked up by national outlets. I received letters and emails from people all over the country, sharing their own stories of betrayal by family members. I was not alone. That was the strange comfort in all of this. There were others like me, other parents who had been hurt by the children they had sacrificed everything for. We formed an invisible community connected by our shared pain. My sister Patricia drove up from Arizona to stay with me for a few weeks. We had not been close for years, partly due to distance and partly due to the busyness of life. But she came without hesitation when she heard what happened. She told me she had never liked Heather. She said she saw the way Heather looked at me like I was beneath her. She apologized for not saying anything sooner. I told her it would not have made a difference. I would not have listened. We believe what we want to believe about the people we love. 3 months after Derek went to prison, I received a letter from him. The envelope was plain white, stamped with the institution return address. I held that letter in my hands for a long time before opening it. Derek apologized for what he had done. He said prison had given him time to think about his life, about the choices he had made, about the man he had become. He blamed the pressure he was under, the fear of losing everything, Heather, expectations. He asked if there was any chance I could forgive him, any possibility of rebuilding our relationship when he got out. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it up and put it in a drawer. I did not write back. I was not ready. Maybe I would never be ready. But I did not throw the letter away either. I suppose that means something. Spring came slowly that year. The snow melted, and the first green shoots appeared in my garden. The apple tree budded, promising another harvest in the fall. I started attending a support group for people who had been financially exploited by family members. We met in the basement of a church downtown, sitting in folding chairs arranged in a circle. There were about a dozen of us, ranging in age from 50 to 90. Each of us had a story of trust broken and innocence lost. Listening to others share their experiences helped me process my own. I learned that what I was feeling, the mix of anger and grief and lingering love, was normal. I learned that healing did not mean forgetting or forgiving on command. It meant learning to live with what happened without letting it consume me. I also started volunteering at a community center near my house. They had a program where experienced tradespeople taught basic repair skills to young adults who had never learned. I spent a few hours each week showing teenagers how to fix a leaky faucet, rewire a lamp patch drywall. It felt good to be useful. It felt good to pass on what I knew to people who appreciated it. Patricia visited again in the summer, and we talked about the years we had lost touch. She was retired too, living alone after her second husband passed away. We realized we had more in common than we thought. She started calling every Sunday evening just to check in. It became something I looked forward to all week. Slowly, my life began to take shape again. Different from before, but not worse. Just different. I repainted the living room, choosing a warm cream color that Linda had always wanted, but we could never agree on. I fixed the squeaky step on the back porch that I had been meaning to repair for 5 years. I planted new rose bushes along the fence varieties that would bloom in red and pink and yellow. The house was still mine. I was still here. One evening I sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air smelled like fresh cut grass and possibility. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year, all the pain and anger, and ultimately the resolution. I realized something important. What Derek did was not my fault. I had raised him the best I could. I had loved him without limits. His choices were his own, shaped by factors I could not control and influences I could not have predicted. Loving someone does not guarantee they will love you back the same way. Sometimes the people you sacrifice everything for will take everything they can get. That is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of theirs. I also realized that protecting myself was not selfish. It was necessary. Setting boundaries, demanding accountability, refusing to be a victim, these were acts of self-respect. They were the things Linda would have wanted me to do. Forgiveness, I decided, was not something I owed anyone. Not Derek, not Heather, not even myself for failing to see the warning signs. Forgiveness, if it came at all, would come in its own time, in its own way. I could not force it, and I would not pretend to feel something I did not. What I could do was move forward. I could build a life from the pieces that remained. I could find joy in small things, connection with people who valued me, purpose in contributing to my community. The house stands behind me as I finish this story. It is still here, just like I am still here. The walls hold 30 years of memories, good and bad, moments of joy and moments of sorrow. Derek Shadow is part of that history now, another chapter in a book that is still being written. I do not know what the future holds. Maybe Derek will get out of prison and try to contact me again. Maybe we will find some way to talk, some path toward understanding, if not reconciliation. Or maybe we will remain strangers, connected only by blood and a past that can never be undone. What I know is this: I survived. I stood up for myself when it would have been easier to look away. I chose my own dignity over the false peace of pretending nothing happened. And on the hard days when the loneliness creeps in and I wonder if I did the right thing, I remind myself of something Walter told me. He said the people who hurt us want us to disappear, to shrink, to make ourselves small, so their choices seem less monstrous. The greatest revenge, he said, is simply refusing to disappear. Just keep living. Just keep standing. So that is what I do. I keep standing. This house will not be sold. Not by force, not by fraud, not against my will. When the time comes for me to leave it, it will be on my terms, in my own way. Until then, I will sit on this porch and watch the seasons change, tending my garden, talking to my neighbors, finding gratitude in each day I am given. If you have made it this far, I want to thank you for listening to my story. I know it was long, and I know parts of it were painful to hear. But I hope it meant something to you. Let me ask you this. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you loved even when it broke your heart to do it? How did you find the strength to protect yourself while still honoring the love you once felt? I would truly like to know. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, if it made you think about your own relationships and the boundaries you need to set, please hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss more stories like this one, and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. You never know who might be going through something similar and feeling alone. Thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your open hearts. I wish you peace. I wish you strength. And I wish you the courage to keep standing no matter what life throws your way. Take care of yourselves.